Spider-Man No Way Home, is it a masterpiece, or is it merely fan service nostalgia bait, or maybe it lies somewhere in between? Stay tuned as we dissect the fragmented, broken reality of Spider-Man No Way Home. And a quick first question to ask the viewer: why wasn't Flash Thompson also rejected from MIT for literally writing a book saying he is Peter Parker's best friend? Yet MJ and Ned are rejected for this exact reason. Do we value logical writing in film anymore? What other glaring plot holes and extreme logical inconsistencies lie hidden in plain sight? So if you're still here and aren't triggered by being critical of plot and story construction, let's contemplate some of the plot holes bleeding into this fan service of a broken reality. And before I go further, I do want to mention I thoroughly enjoyed both Homecoming and Far From Home, especially due to the performances of the villains Michael Keaton and my boy Donnie Darko. And the OG Spider-Man 1 and 2 from Raimi, both masterpieces, and I honestly don't think Raimi's Venom is all that bad. What kind of power and influence did Tony Stark have? Do you think he possibly had connections that could have helped Peter in his MIT predicament? With Peter regaining access to Edith and connections to S.H.I.E.L.D., one of the most powerful organizations on Earth, I really don't see why Peter's first choice was asking Doctor Strange to tamper with the fabric of reality, rather than just using his newly reacquired Iron Man Jr. power and influence. In Spider-Man Homecoming, Tony Stark literally tells Peter, "It's never too early to start thinking about college. I've got some pull at MIT." The man who saved half the world's population, I feel the Earth in general would be trusting of who he appointed, Peter Parker, Spider-Man. Why was Strange so easily swayed into performing the risky spell, with very little discussion of the set parameters of that spell? The MIT lady on the bridge in charge of the school admissions is literally reading Flash Thompson's I Am Peter's Best Friend book when shown in the car. I'm sorry, but this is double-think level writing. It's literally cognitive dissonance, pure contradiction. It was such an unneeded addition to the film to have Flash act like that, not to mention antithetical to comic-accurate Flash. After saving the MIT school lady on the bridge from Doc Ock and fully achieving the goal he set out to do, getting back into school, why did he continue helping to keep reality broken, essentially putting known villains he just met above what he was trying to achieve for his friends? After dealing with the false flagger, holographic drone psyoper, Mysterio, who he gave his total trust to, you think there'd be some level of maturation and a lesson learned about just handing your trust over to people, especially villains. I just don't see any logical maturation in Peter's decisions from the first film. It made sense him acting in naive ways in Homecoming, but if anything, he's more juvenile and more unwise than ever, despite everything he's dealt with already. Doc Ock's entire character arc in the masterpiece Spider-Man 2 was based on him overcoming the AI tentacles and giving his life to shut down the fusion reactor. So changing this to forcing a cure onto him against his own will literally undoes the entire plot point of Spider-Man 2. So either he goes back and doesn't die, so the fusion reactor destroys the entire city, and he dies with it, or he just dies anyway, destroying the fusion reactor, which is what he did in the first place. I personally found this to be disrespectful to Sam Raimi's film in many ways. I felt like these characters were behaving like parodies of themselves or something. Well, all besides for Jamie Foxx, who in his original film was a living parody already. How did Doc Ock know that Norman was the Green Goblin? Yes, he knew Norman, but Harry did everything he could to cover up who the Green Goblin actually was, so he had no way of actually knowing that Norman was the Green Goblin, so there's no explanation for this in the film. Peter and his friends meeting Doc Ock, Otto Octavius, and finding his name to be comical in jokes that I feel really didn't land, at least in my opinion. How many heroes and villains has Peter already met? Quite honestly, Dr. Otto Octavius is really not that outlandish, and he's already aware of a doctor with a pretty strange name, so I just didn't get that as like a joke. Just felt disrespectful to Doc Ock, in my opinion. The mirror dimension is meant to be Doctor Strange's major strength, a realm where only the occult side of Marvel characters can even really operate. How did Peter defeat Strange so easily by apparently applying geometry to defeat him? He also makes Strange look like a joke when he pushes his ethereal body out of his body and he can still have control. So Doctor Strange is like completely ineffectual against Peter throughout this entire film. I just didn't understand why they did that. Why, upon Strange's return from being strung up and essentially tortured over the Grand Canyon for hours, did Strange suddenly go back entirely on his beliefs and motivations of going against Peter? Aunt May wouldn't have died if Peter just listened to Strange and not Aunt May herself. Followed by him in a cringy way, suggesting he really cares for Peter with the whole cringy Sir wordplay thing. Sandman never died. He wanted to get back to his reality and daughter, so why would he be fighting on the sides of the villains who wanted to stay in the MCU in the end? It makes zero sense based on the character's own logic throughout the film. The Lizard also didn't die and was already cured by Garfield, so why would his uncured self be taken back? Wouldn't that mean this reality glitch could happen again and take the uncured versions of these quote-unquote cured villains back, just like what happened to Lizard? Pretty confusing, right? Why was The Amazing Spider-Man 2 put in this film at all, when it's literally one of the worst films ever made in the history of the entire world, and Jamie Foxx's Electro is comparable to a lobotomy? And he never knew who Spider-Man was. He further confirms this by saying he thought Spider-Man was black, hinting at possibilities of Miles Morales in the future. Why were the parallel reality Tobey and Andrew Peters so on board with trying to fix the villains when they already dealt with them in their reality? Especially Tobey, knowing exactly how Doc Ock had to save the city from the fusion reactor. Why were Tobey and Andrew so accepting of just being in this new reality, with pretty much zero shock at all, zero urgency, or even care of returning to their friends and family in their reality? Why didn't Peter just bring Thanos to Happy's house and make a cure for him to give him a second chance? I'm joking, but I'm just saying, it's pretty dumb. In the Tobeyverse, Uncle Ben's "with great power comes great responsibility" holds a lot of weight, as Peter going against his advice is what gets innocent Uncle Ben killed, forcing Tobey to mature into what Spider-Man became. Yet in the MCU, Peter follows exactly what Aunt May directs him to do. It's literally antithetical to the lesson learned by the other Spider-Men. She does everything in her power to get killed, tries to inject the goblin, and it ends up not even working. To me, it's an utterly juvenile, almost arrogant way of trying to solve things. And wasn't Uncle Ben in the Tobeyverse killed by the Sandman before he was the Sandman? Highly ironic. So assuming merely fixing or curing these people would magically make them 100% good and evil can somehow just be cured is juvenile and idiotic. I'm sure I'm pissing a lot of people off with this, but to me, Aunt May's actual lesson in this is with great juvenile stupidity comes real consequence. Responsibility is a sign of maturity. Everything done by Peter and May in this film is antithetical to what I would define as actual responsibility. J. Jonah Jameson is pretty much right about Spider-Man in this film, like the other dude in our reality who sells supplements and talks about gay frogs. Undoing Green Goblin's death deletes entirely James Franco's character arc from Spider-Man 3. Ever seen the movie The Butterfly Effect? Can only imagine the unintended consequences of such changes. And Tobey saying his best friend tried to kill him and died in his arms is totally incorrect. At that point, they were fighting on the same side. He died fighting with Peter, not against him. So let's do a thought experiment. If the same parallel reality bleed through happened with a Peter that wasn't Tom Holland, and the MCU villains that came to this Peter's reality, would somehow fixing or curing Mysterio or the Vulture be applicable in any way? They both know who Peter is. So you see how making this as an assumption is just kind of a dumb thing. Strange at the end of the film just randomly returns through a portal that Ned created, with zero explanation as to how Strange freed himself from the Grand Canyon and then just came through a portal that Ned, somebody who doesn't even know how to do magic, just randomly makes. No explanation. If the entire reason Peter's friends didn't get into school was helping Peter as Spider-Man, why does Peter request their help yet again when dealing with new villains, opening up the exact same potential problem yet again? How and why would Happy be at Aunt May's gravestone if Peter's memory was wiped from his reality, given that Happy only knew May through Peter? And the simping of Happy in this just made Aunt May's death that much more unimpactful, in my opinion. I just don't understand how the absurd plot holes and extreme character illogic can be overlooked. It's a bizarre social phenomenon because I think the main reason people love this film is because Tobey and Raimi's characters returning above all. Yet, so much of this film erases the consequences and lessons of Raimi's original films. And I do admit I'm probably being overly critical in some of these areas, but in others I really don't think so. The film isn't a bad film, it has entertainment value, and I actually like Garfield in it, surprisingly, even though the Amazing Spider-Man films were some of the worst films I've ever seen. But from an overall writing and life lessons learned point of view, it's actual nonsense. So thanks for listening and stopping by. Please like, share, subscribe, and perhaps I'll dissect Venom 2 next, as Sony's Venom is a plot hole entirely in itself, and Tom Hardy attempting comedy is a tragedy. So long. Bye.
Gonna cry?